everyone, welcome back to my podcast. I'm the host Huijia, and today I have few guests with me.
Hi, my name is Jenny.
My name is Antong.
My name is Eunice.
My name is Hui.
Today we are going to talk about an important issue in Malaysia, which is migrant workers. Before we start, let's explain two key terms so we are all on the same page. According to International Labour Organization, migrant workers is someone who move across border to find a job. In Malaysia, they often work in industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, and construction. In contrast, cheap labor is referred to workers who are paid very low wage and often work under exploitative conditions. And in Malaysia, these two categories are often overlapped, as migrant workers are in low wage jobs, which is why this issue is important to talk about. So today, we will explore this issue from different angles, including data, policy, social impact, and development theories. Now, let's look at the number of migrant workers in Malaysia. How big is this issue actually?
Yeah, so if we look at the numbers, migrant workers actually make up a significant part of Malaysia's workforce. There are about 2.1 to 2.4 million documented workers, and if we include undocumented workers, the number could go up to around 3 to 4 million. So overall, they make up about 15% of total labor force.
Wow, that is quite a large number.
Yeah, and this shows that migrant workers are not just temporary, they are a structural part of Malaysia's economy. Actually, most of them come from Indonesia, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Myanmar.
Why do workers from these countries choose Malaysia?
This is because of economic reasons. In their home country, wages are low and job opportunities are limited. So Malaysia becomes attractive because it offers higher income and more stable work.
Yeah, that actually links to something that we will talk about later, the push and pull theory.
Nice, we will come back to that. But first, what kind of job do migrant workers usually do?
They are mostly in what we call 3D jobs, which are dirty, dangerous, and difficult, like construction, plantation, manufacturing, agriculture, and domestic work. These are all jobs that most local workers they avoid.
Yeah, and because local workers avoid these jobs, industries become heavily dependent on migrant workers.
So basically, without migrant workers, some industry might not function properly.
Yeah, especially during the Malaysian industrialization in the 1990s and 2000s, the demand for low-cost labor increased rapidly. Migrant workers help sustain economic growth and keep the production costs low.
But if they contribute so much, why do we keep hearing about the problems and exploitation?
That's the contradiction. Even though they are essential, many migrant workers earn only around the minimum wage, which is 1,500 ringgit, and some face issues like wage deduction, payment delay, and high recruitment debts.
That sounds unfair. What kind of laws are supposed to protect them?
On paper, Malaysia actually has laws to protect the migrant workers. For example, the Employment Act 1955, which covers wages, working hours, and the basic protection. The Minimum Wages Order 2022, which sets the minimum wage. And the Immigration Act 1959 or 63, which regulates entry and work permits. So legally, that is the framework for protection.
Then, what is the problem?
The main issue is not just the law, but how it is enforced. One major problem is the employer type permit system. This means a worker's legal status depends on their employer. So if they lose their job, they may also lose their right to stay. Because of this, many workers are afraid to speak up or report. Also, Malaysia has not signed the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers. So, migrant workers are often treated as temporary labor instead of people with full rights. This is because the government wants to keep control over migration and avoid higher costs, so they focus more on economic flexibility.
So, if something goes wrong at work, they can't leave easily?
Yeah, if they leave, they risk becoming undocumented, which means they could lose their legal status and then deported. So many workers choose to stay silent even they are abused.
And that silence often creates a situation where exploitation can continue. For example, I've read reports from Amnesty International and the Naganita where employers keep and confiscate passports in locked drawers. Therefore, the workers cannot leave, change their job, or even go to a clinic without permission.
That's really serious. What other challenges do they face?
Well, there are quite a lot. Many migrant workers live in overcrowded dormitories with poor housing conditions. Besides, they may face sexual harassment, especially among female domestic workers. Many of them also face both physical and mental abuse. Some are beaten and threatened by their employers, while others are constantly shouted at, insulted, and psychologically pressured. They often have no safe way to report these issues, making their situation even more vulnerable.
So, why this problem continues?
One of the reasons is the levy system, where employers pay a fee to hire the migrant workers. It aims to control migrant numbers, but employers often pass this cost onto the workers. Another policy is recruitment system. Many workers are recruited through agency that charge high fees, so workers often arrive already in debt. Although Malaysia has signed agreements or memoranda of understanding with countries like Indonesia and Bangladesh to regulate recruitment, enforcement is still weak.
And that leads to debt bondage, where they have to keep working just to repay their loans.
So, they are basically trapped in the system.
Yeah, and on top of that, they also face discrimination based on nationality, gender, or race. Access to healthcare is also limited, especially for undocumented workers who fear arrest. And their children, undocumented kids, can't enroll in public schools. They grow up invisible without having the right to receive education.
This really shows that the issue is not just economic, but also social and ethical. But I'm curious, who is actually helping to address these problems?
That's where civil organizations such as NGOs come in. They play a very important role in supporting migrant workers.
What kind of support do they provide?
They can help by documenting abuse cases, providing legal assistance, and raising awareness among the public.
Yeah, and they also act as a safeguard. They monitor government action and push better policies and the enforcement. This is very important because government enforcement alone is often not enough.
So they help bridge the gap between reality and policy?
Yes.
What about the media? Do they play a role as well?
Yeah, of course, the media plays a key role in exposing cases of this exploitation. For example, news reports on poor working conditions or forced labor can bring public awareness to the issue.
Yeah, without media coverage, many people wouldn't even know what's happening. So it helps to bring this issue into public discussion.
And from a development perspective, civil society and media are very important to accountability and transparency. They create pressure on both government and employers to improve conditions.
That's very interesting. So development is not just about economic growth, but also about governance and participation.
Exactly. Now, if we look at development theories, they help explain why this situation exists. For example, modernization theory suggests that as Malaysia develops, it needs more labor, especially for low-skilled jobs.
That explains the increase in migrant workers during the industrialization.
Right. Then there's the push and pull theory. Workers are pushed by poverty and unemployment in their home countries and pulled by higher wages and better opportunities in Malaysia. This explains migration patterns.
What about inequality within Malaysia?
That explained by dual labor market theory. There are two sectors, a primary sector with stable, well-paid jobs which mostly fill with locals, a secondary sector with low wages and high risks. Migrant workers are mostly in the secondary sectors.
This is why they face more exploitation.
Exactly. And finally, world system theory shows how global inequality drives workers from poorer countries, which from peripheral region, to more developed ones like Malaysia, which is semi-peripheral region.
So overall, migrant workers are essential, but also systematically disadvantaged.
Yes, and that's the key issue. Malaysia's development depends on migrant labor, but the system keeps them in a vulnerable position.
So, to conclude our discussion, migrant workers are the important part of Malaysia's economy. However, their contributions are often overshadowed by exploitation, weak enforcement of laws, and limited access to the basic rights. This shows that solving this issue does not only depend on the government, but also require efforts from the society. In the end, migrant workers should not be seen as just low-wage labor, but as human beings who deserve rights and dignity. Thank you everyone for the discussion, and thank you for listening to our podcast.